I might as well stick to Lionel, actually. Yeah.
I know. Okay, greetings and welcome to the Saroth the Mage Experiment. It's a great honour for me to have Mr. Lionel Snell here today. Huge, long career in magic. He's got a fantastic YouTube channel that you can catch at the moment. Author of several books, probably the most favourite being 6 Secrets of the Black Magicians. Explained?
Exposed.
Exposed. Far better.
More journalistic.
Yeah. So here he is. Thanks very much for coming, Lionel. So just before we came on air, it started like you were away going a roll about the magical revival in the 60s, and you were around in those heady days, weren't you?
Yeah.
Were you at Cambridge? You'd left Cambridge?
I was at Cambridge from about 64 to 68, I think it was. Well, yes, yeah. Or 69, yeah. And it was happening, but I could run through the story of my involvement, or non-involvement. The thing was that I was brought up as a child in the 50s, which was a very unmagical time. Very much science was a thing. Science had all the answers. We were expecting that by 2000 we'd all be flying with air cars through the, and speaking to each other with our wrist telephones and things like that. Which I suppose the second thing is getting closer to that now. But as an example of how unmagical it was, sometime in the 60s they opened a vegetarian restaurant in London. Now, it's not the only vegetarian restaurant, but it was the first sort of big one that hit the headlines, and it was called Cranks, because in those days, even being a vegetarian, believing in ancient masters and things like that, and this, of course, was a sort of an act like gays revisiting the word queer and owning it. They called it Cranks, and there it was, and it became very popular. So how had magic managed to survive at all in the 50s? And my theory is it survived by disguising itself as psychology. You couldn't tell someone, you couldn't really be a magician in the usual way, but people like W.E. Butler and Down Fortune taught this sort of, exploring in the inner planes and everything, a sort of, so you could say it's a sort of psychology, which fitted in with things like psychodynamics and that.
Yeah.
And but the only source of material was a thing called the Aquarian Book Service, which so I was always interested in magic, so I was sort of looking for something more, and there wasn't a lot of stuff around. There was a person called Margaret Bruce, who was a transvestite, yes, from man to woman, and she had a catalogue which had wonderful things like, Ruthvar incense and products like that, somewhere in the Midlands or north of England. And there was a thing called the Metaphysical Research Group in near Hastings. They had a fantastic catalogue of, dowsing pendulums and aura goggles and all that sort of stuff, which was more than I could afford, but it was really exciting to read, But for actual sort of, to find, wasn't on. But you began to get rumblings from the art world because of the beatniks. And the beatniks talked about Zen and psychedelics, things like that. So, you sort of thought, perhaps this is where is it? And I got very excited by that, very fascinated by the beatniks because I love the idea of Zen. And a friend, where we lived, there was the mill house and there was a stable and the bakery. And a friend came and visited there and stayed there for the summer. And he was a friend of Dr. Joyce Martin, who was one of the first psychologists using LSD as a regression therapy.
I see.
And so, as a kid of, I don't know, sort of about 10 or so, a number of my family were using or experimenting with LSD and that. And I was really fascinated. And I asked if I could do it. And they said, no, you're too young. You haven't got anything to regress back to. So you got put off. But I was always intrigued, So when I went to school and I heard that Morning Glory has got LSD properties,
That's right.
I'm a very cautious person. So I sort of picked some Morning Glory seeds and nibbled at half of one, then three quarters of one. And I began to have wonderful visions. The place began to look like sort of, a great work of art and that sort of thing in Bristol. And I later discovered, of course, you need about 50 before anything happens. So it was a wonderful example of expectations being met. And it was sort of, again, in the artistic field, this was, you're getting some sort of stuff about this. In fact, I think the school play we did, well, I wasn't involved with it, but one of the teachers did a production of, I think it was King Lear. And for his stage set, he got scaffolding and made a big structure which represented the molecular structure of lysergic acid or LSD, because he felt, that was a sort of HEP insight. So there was that sort of thing was rumbling away and getting me interested. When I got to Cambridge, of course, I was right back in Squaresville. There was nothing like that. But I got interested in happenings. They were about the most magical thing around. It was just beginning to get going. I went to one by Jean-Jacques Lebel in London, who later became well known for his happenings. And I was there, I think it was my first year, when they had the first happening in Cambridge. And it was very sort of studenty. There were people up on stage doing funny things and sort of wandering around with, gas ovens on their heads or something like that. And the audience was sort of saying, oh yeah, I think what's his name? Duchamp did that in 1923, I think. And that sort of comment, just objectively observing it all. But I thought this was interesting, but it's not working. Now I'd come across I'd always been warned off Crowley by people like Diane Fortune and all those who respected him, but said he's dangerous. Don't go there without someone looking after you, sort of thing. But I bought a copy of Magic in Theory and Practice in the market in the centre of Cambridge, and I was really interested. And I particularly noticed what he said about dramatic rituals. The idea of having a ritual where it's all very carefully rehearsed and everyone knows their part, except the main character is the only one who knows the climax. So that you build up this sort of tension of people, doing exactly what they're supposed to do and sort of really concentrating on it, but they don't know where they're going. And then you have a climax which sort of explodes it. And then you see what happens. You have an improvisation after that. And I thought, now that is really what something like this happening needed. That difference, the tension between sort of discipline and then bursting. And so I put out an advertisement and things saying, I'm interested in exploring, sort of calling on ideas of, witchcraft or occult, whatever, and ritual, and anyone who's interested. And first lesson was, the first person who called was from the press. And nice man turned up and said, this is fantastic. Can I have exclusive rights? Black magic in Cambridge. We will provide you with a cottage. We'll provide you with all you need, as long as you give us exclusive access and photographs. And I said, no, actually, I'm just sort of experimenting an artistic concept. So go away. He said, well, don't let anyone else have the story before me. And I said, no, that's okay. And anyway, a few of us got together, and then I was in right panic. What do we actually do? Now, fortunately, one of my friends who was in the English department had been reading Jesse Weston's book about, early, sort of ritual ideas and the idea of a tradition passed down. And he came up with a wonderful framework based on the idea of the sacrifice king. And then, having a sort of communion where you ate a salmon together and wine, And so I built up this thing around it, 3 parts. One was an initiation at the beginning, then there was the sort of the ritual beheading in the middle, and then you went back into the other room and had this feast. The wonderful thing doing it in Cambridge, of course, you had a beautiful old room that you were able to hire. I got costumes from the theatre people, and when I said to the kitchen, you know, I want a great big salmon. They said, how big? And I sort of waved my arms. I got this thunder-sized salmon, you know, cooked. And we got a few sort of silver plates and things, great silver platters and goblets and everything were given to me. You know, couldn't do this in many places. So it was a very sort of dramatic looking ritual. But as is the way with things in university, everyone went away afterwards. And I was left, I actually wept that evening, you know, because I had such expectations and I wasn't sure. And I met people later and they said, oh yes, this is the other thing I felt that was missing in this happening, is that people were self-conscious. So for my ritual, I told everyone to bring their gowns, put them on back to front, and I'd made just black paper bags as masks. So everyone was anonymous. So nobody felt that they were being watched. You see, I thought it was very important.
That is very important, I think.
And when I introduced them to it, I said, look, all I'm doing is a sort of artistic experiment, you know, taking happenings a stage further and all that. And one of them said to me, you know, it was incredibly powerful, that ritual, because the moment we were all cut off and covered, I began to think, he was very outward, open about this, but I wonder if there's something behind it, you know? So the sort of electric atmosphere.
You're the secret master.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. What's really behind this? Is he a Satanist or what? So there was a tremendous electric atmosphere. And one of the people who took part had a nervous breakdown a few months later and gave me all his magic books. And the other one, who played the Sacrifice King, I discovered next term that at the end of the term, he actually committed suicide, turning on the gas taps and taking an overdose of LSD and writing a running commentary on his passing. So, you know, wow, that was a sort of a shock me. And, you know, what had I released? But it was, so as I say, at that stage, I was really into sort of exploring the edges of art, looking for something magical. Another thing that happened was the only sort of approach I had was in the university newspaper. There was an advert, someone saying astrologer would like to meet people of similar interests. Now, I thought astrology was the silly end of the occult. You know, I wasn't keen on it, but I was interested to know who had answered his thing. So I went to him. And he turned out to be a very nice Yorkshire man, a student at Churchill College, and he lent me some books on it, and I thought they were very interesting, actually. So we became friends. And that term, I remember my friends and him going to pubs and sitting in the garden, you know, jawing away about it. All my friends were skeptics, you know, and him and I, we were defending astrology and being sort of shouted down and everything like that. And the term ended, and the next year, because that was the last term, you know, the next year, the beginning of the term, I thought I must get back to him. So I went to Churchill College and looked for his name on the sort of, so I could leave a message, and it wasn't there. So I thought, oh, crikey, has he been sacked or something? So I asked the porter, and I can't remember his name, but I said, you know, what's happened to this guy? I knew his name then. The porter says, there's no one of that name here. I said, well, that's funny, because he was here last year. And the guy looked back and said, no, there was no one of that name. And I'd been to his room and everything. My friends were speaking to him. He'd vanished, you see. So it was a rather good sort of, you know, in search of the miraculous type of event.
Yeah.
This guy just vanished and there was no record of him. And one of the things he was doing, which inspired me later, is that he was going to sacred sites and camping there overnight in a sleeping bag, keeping a running diary through the night of everything he experienced. And that sort of inspired me. And later with other people, I did a lot of that. So that really was how I experienced the 60s. Magic sort of rumbling in the art world, but nothing
I think
really
it
much
started to come
happening.
through in rock music and stuff as well, didn't it?
Yes, that's it. The
Lots of
psychedelic sort of thing, you know,
occulty references, yeah.
a sort of idea that there's something else, but not exactly spelling out what it was. And so, and of course, by the time we got to the 70s, it was bubbling up to the surface. And you actually had, you know, newspapers interviewing witches and all that sort of thing. So precursor to Chaos Magick, there were groups that were experimental. There was one called the Green Circle, I think it was, in North London, a person who then moved to Bristol. And I joined a group where we were as a ritual group with a formal initiation, which they worked out. But within that initiation, once you had you had the opening ceremony, you could experiment with anything. You know, one person said, "I'd like to try a classical Greek ritual," and you know, and another time someone would say, "I'd like to do something based on the phases of the moon," and another one would say, "So
same
you know,
group doing different rituals."
yes, that's it. So within it, you could experiment. You know, I'd like to do one based on the Arthurian legends, someone said, you know, and so on and so forth. So that sort of trying new things was already in the air certainly by the mid 70s, but sort of a bit earlier than that. So that was sort of how I experienced that magical revival.
Yeah. I was watching, I'm in a major period of this at the moment. I was watching a video of yours just before we came on, and it was about doubt and, you know, skepticism and magic. And you talked about periods of, you know, years, cycles of believing less and less. You know, I came into magic full steam ahead, believed in everything. I was doing rituals every day. And lately, I just, you know, how does it work? Where are the, you know, I'm asking all these rational questions, and I think I'm diluting the magic. How can I stop, Lionel?
Well, I always sort of feel that actually every magician needs an inner skeptic. But just you're a magician if you don't put it in the driving seat. You know, it's that viewpoint is worth having, but if you put in the driving seat, the inner skeptic says, "There's no point in doing that. There's nothing there," you know. And I feel that the time to analyze is it after you've got some results or something's happened. You know, then you can say what's really worthwhile in that. Now, I have had times, very dry times. I remember one time in the late 80s when, having been very much involved with sort of magic groups and doing things like going to sacred sites, you know, and listening to the site and creating a ritual and all that sort of thing, which is a wonderful thing to do in a small group. You know, really brings you together. I came to a very dry period, and what I eventually did is made a sort of mantra: there is no magic. Something like, the gods don't exist, there is no magic. And I really embraced that. And what was interesting, as a sort of like a magical ritual, if you like, saying, you know, the gods don't exist, there is no magic, or something like that, was all the sort of energy I've been putting out into this other world. You know, there's the gods, there's magic, there's all these things beyond. It had nowhere to go but to flow back into me. And I found I was sort of being recharged by that denial. And it actually had a sort of healing effect. I became sort of, everything I'd given out and was waiting for it to do something came back into me. And I can't remember exactly how I got back on lines, but it was something happened. I thought that was very interesting. I was really allowing myself to sink to that depth of sort of rationality, and really there's nothing in this really, and all that. And found that I got through it, that it was contributing something to me. It wasn't actually draining me the way I feared it would.
So I like this idea you've got as well about magic. You know, it's a cycle, I guess. We go through artistic periods in our own lives and in society, I guess, scientific, religious, but at the end of one always is another. And at the end of all of them really is magic as well, I think. You know, art certainly leads to magic. Science is leading in a very magic-y way at the moment, it would seem, with artificial intelligence and all that.
Yeah.
And the faith required for magic is also a religious kind of thing.
Well, you see, the sort of thing I was told to believe early on was, yeah, there was a thing called magic, but it was like primitive, you know, and now we know better. And okay, let's give it credit. Alchemy was a primitive type of chemistry, but out of it came proper chemistry. And what I've learned is that wasn't that way around at all. The chemistry of the sort of ancient Greek and in China and places around the world in that axial age, it had a lot of sort of mumbo jumbo in it, but the actual was careful measurement, measuring quantities, mixing different metals and making alloys. You know, it was really sound, the experimental work. And the explanation I have read in one book, which I think was, I can't remember, the guy, History of Alchemy, he said what happened was alchemists or chemists like that, metallurgists, became very important because of the minting of coins. And so the rulers didn't want them sharing their knowledge. They locked them up. Now, if you do that to science, again, science depends on this total sharing of knowledge and passing it around. And so it all had to be secret and everything. And so the whole mystique of alchemy in the Roman era began to build up, you know, all these mysterious texts and sort of strange ideas and everything. And I couldn't help thinking about what happened in the Cold War in the 80s, where, well, take Hitler's time, you know, he chucked out all the Jewish scientists and created National Socialist science, all about fire and ice and hollow earth and that sort of thing. Science went weird, you know, being cut off from the. And then in the 80s, you had these sort of, you used to get these rumors, you know, laboratories behind the Iron Curtain exploring this, that, and the other. You think, oh, well, they always were nutters. And then you discover that CIA is exploring, staring at goats. You know, sort of, when you begin to block this free thing of information, science begins to get weird. And of course, you would say, well, luckily we don't have that now. But in a sense, we still have that pressure because a lot of science is funded by business that wants to keep the secrets, you know. So I sort of see science is progressing like anything, of course, but it's also creaking a bit at the roots. You begin to get stories of, you know, one of the important things of science is repeatable experiments. Now, I've seen reports about actually very few experiments do get repeated. Why? Because if it's financed by business, what business is going to pay a lot of money to have someone's experiment from 3 years ago being repeated simply to see if it works? No, they want to pay for something new. So it's becomes a bit of a myth, this, you know, repeatability thing. And yeah, so I see many ways that science can erode and magical thinking begin to arise. And I think it's happening very much at present. I just happen to have done this graph doing once.
Web traffic of Richard Dawkins' main website. Wow, it's really killed off, hasn't it?
That's it. This is 2008 or so, I think it is.
Yeah.
He must have built his website then.
Yeah.
By the time you get to here, which is 2012-13, it crashes down. Wow. And from that sort of time, people began taking things like astrology a bit more seriously and alternative things like that. And I mean, to me, that's just one measure of sort of, you know, there was this very strong skeptical movement.
Yeah, there was.
The first decade.
Hitchens and all them as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, yes, it's names which ring a bell to me. And of course, I knew the same thing in my childhood. As I say, the 50s was a very skeptical time, and then came the 60s. And the same thing happened in Victorian times. You know, there was mid-Victorian times, you had this huge scientific thing with electricity and Darwin. And then it was followed by the fin de siècle and the founding of the Golden Dawn and all that sort of thing. So I say it's as, you know, well, one way I look at it is that science is a way to reach certainty, but it's not very good at complexity.
Yeah.
And when you're faced with real complexity, that's when magical thinking has got something to offer.
Yeah. Before I forget, I'd really like to ask you about the Abramelin long ritual that you did, because I've heard you mention it in some, but I had a really good account of. My first thing was, how and why did you decide to do it? Because it's notoriously difficult to be alone for even a month, even in lockdown. And how long did you do yours? Was it a 6-month version?
I did the 6-month version. Yes, that's all I knew at the time. You know,
So,
when I was at school, let's say they're sort of always looking out for something real magic. About the only sort of the nearest thing to a magical magazine in these newsagents was a thing called Prediction, which really was an astrology magazine, but it would have the odd article about rune stones and things like that. And there was a review in that of a book called The Book of the Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage, which Watkins had just republished as a limited edition. And this review said, this is the real magic. No tongue of hanged man and eye of newt stuff. You know, this is serious. And I thought, wow. And I told my brother about this book, and he was a member of the Gloucestershire Public Library. He had a ticket, and he ordered it. And it's pretty marvelous, actually. In those days, you could order a rare book like that, and the library got it. And so I took it to school and sort of devoured it several times over. And of course, I was absolutely sure as soon as I left school, I was going to do this. But of course, life goes on. It didn't happen. But I'd had this taste of, you know, this is the first thing that looks like really serious magic to me. And it kept me going. Now, in the mid-70s, I wrote Sesotbame, Sesotbme, and a few copies sold around, you know, and one or two people contacted me and said it's really great, or, you know, it was selling well in the few shops that sold it. And I got a letter one day from a woman that said, I've got an interesting project I'd like help with. And what her project was is she wanted to do the Abramelin operation, and would I be her advisor? And I said, I can't be because I haven't done it myself.
Sounds like the film Dark Song, if you don't mind me interrupting. Have you ever seen that one?
Yeah, touch of that, yes, that's it. Dark Song was much more exciting, I can tell you. The ritual was much better. So anyway, I was in a really dreary job at the time. I had nothing really much to lose. And I thought, if I find a decent job that I'm looking for, I won't get this opportunity again. So I left. That was in sort of just before Christmas time, and vowed that come Easter, I would do it. And we would both do it sort of in parallel. She was living in the town of Luton, and I was in the country. But we'd just sort of keep in contact with each other, and, you know, and perhaps compare notes or whatever. And so that's what we did. The cottage, my instinct was to go into the deep country, because I'm a country person, you know, and I'd really like to be in the middle of a wood with no one around and really do it that way. But I realized if you try and do that in England, you know, you draw attention to yourself. You'll get old ladies bringing you cakes and saying, oh, are you happy in love or something? You know, no. I was actually much more invisible just doing it in this sort of pleasant suburban village in Hertfordshire. So that's what I did. In the shrubbery, I built my oratory, made my instruments and things like that. And come Easter, I started doing it. And the real thing about it is the duration, I think. Because you're going with high hopes. Oh yes, you know, I've got quite a few years experience of magic and meditating. You know, the only thing around was William Bloom's George Chevalier book, The Sacred Magician. And you thought, well, he wasn't much good, you know, this wimpish stuff about saying he's a miserable worm and everything. You know, a few weeks into it, I was finding myself, oh, bloody miserable worm. I can't even get up on time, things like that. The sheer discipline of trying to do something, regulate that under your own impulse, is very much what's about. And I see those, so I only did the 6 months, but I saw it as very much a sort of a strengthening exercise.
Did you do it
okay,
by the book, like every step?
Yep, by the book, yeah. Yes. Made my temple, you know, made my clothing, had my room. I moved into a different room for my chamber, you know, and sort of cleaned it every day or week or whatever it was, and all that type of stuff. Now, when it first began, the person with a friend from college, and we led our separate lives because he worked elsewhere, but he wasn't there. And the atmosphere was electric. You know, I found my sort of hair standing on end and things like that.
Wow.
When he came back, it was an example of that normalizing thing. Even though nothing else had changed, it felt more normal, and those sort of phenomena died down. And looking back on it, of course, I would have preferred to have been in the middle of nowhere on my own, and it would have been very powerful. But there's no way was it a cop-out, because trying to do something like that with 1 foot in a normal life, it's the yogic thing, you know, of the way of the householder. It's not a cop-out. It's actually bloody difficult to keep up a normal facade when you're doing this. So the challenge was huge. And it meant that, you know, occasionally it was something you couldn't avoid, like an old friend turning up. And this thing, if I tell you too much, I'll arouse curiosity and he'll be talking about it. If I tell you too little, he'll think I'm scorning him. So it was a bit like that thing, that vow that Crowley had. You know, I interpret everything that happens as a message from God, as it were. So, you know, I had to go to a sherry party to be polite. I was treating this as a ritual that had been imposed upon me by the guardian angel to see how I could handle it, things like that. So it was a very strange thing. And I was disappointed at the end, because earlier on I was ashamed to realize I really wanted to see a sort of golden angel with fluttering wings, you know, and being bestowed with powers of money and all this sort of thing. Oh God, you know, I'd gone into it saying, you know, the important bit is that first, like Israel Regardie said, the important bit is that 6 months. That's what really makes you a magician. All the rest is the sort of the sweeties at the end, you know. But I realized I really wanted that. And that part of me was very disappointed, although I tried to prepare myself. And it was interesting that 2 people had helped me with it a bit, advised me in advance. One was a guy called Ted Bryant, who'd been a disciple of Crowley's at the time he was working with Frida Lady Harris, you know, on the tarot trumps and all that. And he'd given me advice about, you know, Jewish fasts and that type of thing, and provided me with some imagery to help me. And the other was Gerald York. And I visited Gerald York, you know, sometime after it finished. And he said, how did it go? And I said, well, it was pretty amazing, but I didn't hit the jackpot. And he said, the first time people do it, what they invoke is their ego. That's what happened to Crowley. That's what happened to anyone else I know who tried it. It's your ego you get, not the guardian angel. That's why you have to do it another time. And I thought, oh, blimey. I don't think I can put my life aside for another 6 months. You know? So the idea of doing another time really, but I had this feeling, you see, that I needed more time at the end. It wasn't finished. It was a feeling I had. And then I had this extraordinary experience. As I drove back, I thought, well, I didn't find anything as exciting as my ego. So I have this idea of an ego trip, you know, here I am, the creator of the universe. You know, I'm channeling masterworks, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
No. And then I thought, well, what is my ego? And I realized I had this self-image of being the loser, you know, the youngest child that wasn't really had anything worthwhile. And so I thought, well, actually, in a way, what I invoked was my ego. And I was left with that. It was sort of haunting me.
Yeah.
But it is true that the next 7 years were very strange and really shook my life up.
Yes.
And I could see things happening which were sort of symbolic of what should have happened in those 7 days. So I did feel I was really being put through something, and it was a very important thing that had happened to me.
Do you feel like you did make contact with, is there even such a thing as an absolute holy guardian angel?
The way I saw it is I had had the knowledge, but not the conversation. You know, I wanted to sort of, I got answers through things like the I Ching, and the odd word coming to my mind, you know, but I really would have liked to sort of sit down like I am with you, you know, chew the fat with this super being, you know, find out my secrets and everything. And I was very disappointed. It was silent and much more mysterious than that.
Yeah.
The nearest thing was 7 years later. 7 years later, I got for the first time a decent job. Took me to Winchester, a new place, where I got myself a flat. First time I'd had my own house. I arrived there. I had all my luggage in the car to take up to this 3rd floor little flat. And I thought, it's late at night. I can't face carrying it up. And I thought, but I can't leave my Abramelin altar down in the car. That doesn't seem right. So I took it out and carried it up the stairs. And I got that same feeling of my flesh creeping, my hair standing on end. And I put it in the bedroom. And I realized it was 7 years to the day from the day I'd finished it.
Fantastic.
And so the next morning at sunrise, I opened vestments and lit the incense, knelt in front of the altar, and I had this strong sort of inner voice saying, "Now you're a magician," and that was the end of it. You know, sort of, and became much more active at that point. So it was, yeah, you launch strange synchronicities when you do magical things.
Yeah.
And they intrigue and give you an appetite more than they satisfy.
Absolutely.
And I remember Joel Barocco talking about, he wrote one of his things and he said, these coincidences are like footnotes, footnote markers in the script of your life. And you look down and there's no footnote. In other words, significant, and you look down for the explanation, there's nothing there. And that it really feels like that. You know, that's
you're always chasing the next thing, even no matter what you achieve, it seems. So did you continue with a kind of ritually magic after that, or you know, what form did your practice take through the years, and do you go on in and out of various practices?
Let me think. Now, one of the things which, yes, it was after that, when I say sort of magical life began to take off more. Well, first of all, I'd been sort of recognized by people who were to form Chaos Magick. You know, so I got sort of experience of going to, yeah, I'd written these books and I'd driven around sort of putting them in bookshops, you know, and finding a few had sold and many hadn't, that sort of thing, SSOTBME. And I got a message from someone in Leeds saying, would I come and give a talk at the Leeds University Occult Society? Now, this was showing how things had moved on, you know, wow, an Occult Society in Leeds University. So I went up there and met this guy, and he took me to this hall which had quite a lot of people seated in it. And he stood up and said, "Our next speaker needs no introduction." And my jaw practically hit the floor. I didn't know there was anyone, apart from the odd individuals who had read my stuff. They say he needs no introduction. So suddenly there was a sort of school of magic that recognized me. And I discovered one of the influences was I had become interested in Osman Spare around about 1970. I'd read about him in Francis King's was it Sexuality, Magic and Perversion, or some name like that. A fairly sensational book. One chapter was about Osman Spare. And he said something which was absolute red rag to a bull for me. He said something like, Osman Spare's relationship to other Western magic is a bit like Zen Buddhism to the Buddhist tradition. Wow, I must find out about this guy. It sounds just what I want. And so I asked Gerald York about it, and he said, "Oh, that's a pity. I had all his works because I made a vow to collect everything of the Thelemic tradition, and he'd collected all this work of Osman Spare." He said, "There's this guy called Kenneth Grant who wanted to write something about it, and I gave it all to him, and he hasn't produced anything yet. But I've still got one book, which was the Book of Pleasure. He had another copy of the Book of Pleasure, and he lent it to me. And it was really opaque, but I found it so interesting.
It's very hard to read. I couldn't stand it. Very unusual use of language and punctuation.
Yeah, weird language he uses. To me, that I wrote this long article called Spare Parts, where I went through it section by section, sort of interpreted it, and what it related to. Things like many things related to the Tao Te King, other things related to Jacob Boehmer's ideas, things like that. Yeah. So I put in, I think this is what it's about. So it was the first really serious sort of semi-explanation of Osman Spare's work. Mm-hmm. And it got published in about 1972 or 3, I think it was, in a magazine called Agape. They put it, Agape number 4, had this article, Spare Parts, plus my copy of the Anathema of Zos as a facsimile. Okay. And so apparently that was bought by quite a few of the original Chaos people, before Chaos Magick was formed, and got that interest going. And then, of course, Kenneth Grant did publish his book, and that stimulated the interest still further.
Yeah, he might have been forgotten altogether without you guys.
Yeah. Well, there was the other thing of his art. There was another strand of people who were interested in his art and became fashionable too. So there was a sort of symbiosis between the art side and the magic side that brought him to popularity or interest. And I, having collected as best I could all the books that he'd published, people borrowed them from me. Stephen, one of them, I can't remember which one it was, not Focus of Life, one of the others. And then he reprinted it himself and published it, you see. Mike McGee, I lent him the cipher manuscripts, which Gerald York had given me to translate, and I got stopped because it was so boring. And he published them, so sort of I was a sort of channel through which some of these things appeared. Yes. And I didn't particularly worry about that because my main interest was spreading the word sort of thing, finding out who else was interested. And then the Sorcerer's Apprentice did a collected works of Osman Spare, which really was all my books in facsimile put into one volume. And the second edition of that had my article Spare Parts in it. So, it was out there, and that I think was probably about 1976 or so. I can't remember. Yeah, so after the Abramelin, I found that there was a sort of current evolving that I could relate to. And the other thing was the much more sort of folksy, but really so good. A group of us had got together and we would go to sacred sites. This is when I was living in Winchester. Typical thing was I would go to the Long Barrow, West Kennet Long Barrow, and I'd go there perhaps at dawn and sit in it and sort of meditate, open myself up. And I began to get a feeling for it because it had like 5 chambers, 1, 2, 3, 4, and a 5th one. Mm-hmm. And I sort of saw in that the pentagram and the 4 elements. And so I sort of formed an idea of a ritual for that. There were 5 of us, and I had this idea that if we, by lot, each chose 1 element, and then each independently worked out a little ritual for that element and not tell the others. Mm-hmm. And I chose the lot that would be spirit, so I was up at the top. And my ritual involved blowing bubbles, which were like little floating spheres. Yeah. And other people, one person, I think it was Earth, had a sort of a skull and a rose, and you stood and meditated on it and read this thing. So each person thought of one thing. And the important thing was, you see, the others didn't know about it. Mm-hmm. So on the day we went there, and we each went to our separate room, set up our ritual, and then after 10 minutes, whatever it required to set it up, the bell chimed, and we each moved around the pentagram to the next place.
The next element.
Yes, that's it. So what you had was an experience where you set for other people, and then you had 4 surprise happenings, mm-hmm. which led you to the different elements. And then at the end, we all converged into the Temple of Spirit with a closing ritual. And things like that, sort of inventing a ritual. It had that chaos thing of, you're working from scratch. Yeah. It wasn't following any particular principle, but you were sort of building something of your own volition. Yeah. So it had that. It also had the beauty of sort of listening to a place and as best you could asking the place what it wanted to happen, which was very, very lovely, and so I have very good memories of the 80s and doing this sort of thing. Small groups. We did things like going to where Diane Fortune, the sea priestess, where it's set, and that sort of camping. Yeah, down in Somerset, that, and there is the old fort that were in the story, and things like that, and lighting a fire of Azrael on the beach the night before, and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, and it's a really beautiful thing to do. So, yeah, I was involved with things like that in the 80s. And then the other thing was Gerald Suster. You know of him?
I've heard of him.
Yeah. Well, he was very much into the sort of, he was both was and wasn't into the academic, educated essay club side of it. The funny thing was, he would set up an essay club, very gentlemanly, meeting over a pub. You would have your meal and then you would have the essay read out and then you would discuss it. He set up this very sort of gentlemanly thing with people like Elick Howe, Francis Yates, Bob Gilbert from Bristol, who was an antiquarian who wrote these wonderful sort of academic things. Christopher McIntosh, who wrote the history of Rosicrucianism and things like that. Myself, Tanya Lerman, who was an American anthropologist studying occultism. All these sort of Elick Howe, who wrote all these sort of occult heavies. And Gerald Suster would set this all up. And after a few meetings, he'd say, all we're doing is sitting talking. Where's the magic? And he'd break it up and found another organization. You see. So, but I love those times. I liked a bit of academia. It was really rather good. And amongst the people I met there later on was a guy called David Rietti, who said, I'm interested in setting up the OTO again in England. Whoever's interested, would they get in contact with me? And I thought, I'm not a joiner. I don't want to be part of this, but I am interested. So I went along to the opening meeting. There were only 3 people there, and you needed 3 people to set it up. So I found myself becoming a member of the OTO, even though the formality of it wasn't really my thing, and I was a pretty lousy secretary. But I helped get it off the ground and so on, and I sort of stuck with it. So I'm a Thelemite in that sense. Although in some ways my heart was more into the chaos side of it.
You can be both.
I remain.
You can be both, I think.
Oh yes, definitely. Yeah. I see it as I'm a Thelemite, but with some of the openness, because the antipathy between the two really was because some Thelemites in the 70s were getting very sort of puritanical and what's the word? Fundamentalist. Yeah.
So Crowley went to Cambridge as well, didn't he? As an aside.
Yes. Yeah. And he'd had a wonderful collection of his books, you see. Having got Magic and Theory of Practice, I went to the library, and what was nice, it was not a perfect, but a very good collection of his books, because the librarian, of course, was trying to get every book published. And so you also had these letters, dear librarian, yes, I can get you a copy of, yoga. But why don't people pay for my newest books? All they want is the old stuff, and they'll pay a fortune for them. So letters like that. It was really wonderful, sort of feeling of connection to the old man when they were there. Yeah. So I was very lucky in that.
Have you still got the Crowley stuff?
Yes. I when I was a state of poverty, I got rid of a huge lot of my books, all my alchemy books, things like that. I sold them off, but I kept the Crowley, and I sold off the Osman Spare because I could get good prices for those. But I kept sort of books, republished books by him, like Robert Ansell's ones, things like that. So I've got some lovely Crowley stuff. I've got a book of Thoth, the original beautiful leather bound, or half bound, and books signed by him. One time when I went to visit Gerald York, because I used to visit him a lot because he lived not so very far from me, I called in the bookshop in Tewkesbury, a little secondhand bookshop, and there was a copy of the collected works of Aleister Crowley, and £1. Ooh. So I bought it and took it and showed it to him, and it was a vellum bound edition or whatever, and in the frontispiece there was a sigil and a pencil poem. He said, that's it, that's Crowley's writing. You've got an unpublished poem by Crowley. And so he had to collect everything, so he took a picture of it and copied it down. And he said, I made a vow and constantly by seamen that I would collect all of Crowley's works. And you've, as he put, singed my beard by finding that on my doorstep. So I'm going to have to reconsecrate the talisman, he said. So that was rather wonderful. So I got not a big, perfect collection like Clive Harper, and serious collectors. But over the years, I did get some very nice Crowley material.
So going forward and with your YouTube channel at the moment, what's the if we have one more topic to talk about, anything you wanted, what direction are you going in right now?
Wow. There was a long time when I was trying at last to write that book, My Years of Magical Thinking, when I was sort of trying to get it all down in sequence, explain it. That gave me a lot of things I could talk about, because I could try out ideas. The next chapter I was working on something, and I could sort of try it out. began really as just a gift for my niece who wanted some material for a sort of workshop, you know. And I said, oh, I'll do a few little short pieces. And then people said, this is really interesting. Could you make a YouTube channel out of it? And could you keep doing these? And I say, so I was really, what I wanted to write about, I found I could talk about it and sort of air it and see how it went. And so that was gave me a lot of material. Now, I've come to the end of that, and I remain very busy, so it wasn't often I found the time to actually come up with something. But every now and again, I boil with an idea, and I have one for next time, which is about sort of why the way of thinking of meditation, which sort of the contemplative meditation, looking out where you heighten your senses, so you're not sort of turning in, you're actually becoming particularly aware of all around. Why I wrote that at the beginning of How to See Fairies as the first step to developing clairvoyance. And I wanted to say more about that. So it's like an idea has come to me and I'm enthusing about it, and I want to put it out to see how it works with other people. So it's a bit random. It's a bit like that. Things happen.
I like the randomness.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, well, bubbles up, you know, like the methane coming up out of the marsh. But another thing, I have got another book project, and this is one that I promised I would do in about 1994. And I'm still working on it now, or rather I restarted working on it. And that's for a long time, I wrote a satirical column called The Satanist Diary, which was a big piss take of the sort of Dennis Wheatley, world's wickedest Satanist idea.
Yes.
A lot of characters in it and everything. And QAnon would love it, because of course the idea is that, yes, we are run by a satanic conspiracy, you know, we always have been, you know, forget the politicians, that we're running the thing, and this is us, you know, here we are. So it was a regular column. Now, in about 90, I was reading through it, in about 1995 or 4, I said, we're planning a collected works of this. And it's been hanging around ever since. Well, I am trying to go ahead and publish that. And I'm struggling with Quark Express, because I realize it's a book to sort of dip into rather than read cover, making it a bit like a coffee table book, you know. It'll be hard and sort of 3 columns of text, you know, things like that. So it's more a sort of dipping into type of book. And my limitations as a page layout person is making it quite a slow project. But that might be something I might actually use a few of those pieces as sort of satirical presentations, because I'm very much aware as I go through it is this whole thing of post-truth. Well, actually, my thing was post-truth. You know, I talk about Margaret Thatcher joining us for a satanic thing and making plans and that sort of thing, you know, totally post-truth fake news.
Yeah.
But it's a satire, you know. And so I got this idea that satire and post-truth are the same, and it's like beauty being in the eye of the beholder. If you read and learning, then it's satire. If you read it with fear and anger, then it's post-truth. You know, it's the same stuff. And so I'm interested in sort of what the reaction would be to this thing when it's published. Yeah,
sounds great. I tried to write a sort of comedy fiction novel about Aleister Crowley fighting the Nazis and stuff, but
oh yeah,
I gave up. But
shame. Great theme, I think. Yes.
So I was just going to ask a couple of things more. You mentioned some very interesting stuff about secrecy, which I think is so true as a way of containing this weird magical world that you're building, usually on your own. You know, it's normally solid magicians now, isn't it? There's a lot of stuff on Facebook with people sharing their magic, very, you know, their rituals, and I've just done this ritual. Why do you think it's better to keep these things under? Don't tell about them, basically. The secret of magic.
Secrecy, yes. Of course, I was. I grew up in the 60s onwards with the idea of let's get it out there, and my whole thing of, rather than publishing the works of Osman Spare as a limited edition in leather to costing 50 quid, get out a collected works of Osman Spare, a fairly cheap, straightforward edition.
Yeah.
So I was very much into the, no, let's get it out there school of thought. But I realized the importance of when it actually comes to doing magic, the secrecy plays a real role. Now, looking back on it with my sort of theory of, the 4 ways of looking at the world, like Crowley, I got religion and magic opposite each other. Because for me, religion is very much the herd thing.
Yes.
You share a religion and the religion binds you together. And one of the binding things, which is a bit negative, is despising all those outside the boundary. They're the heretics, they're the baddies. Now, magic, for me, is very much the value lies in the individual. So even if you do a group ritual, which is a wonderful thing to do, usually the value of it is how it transforms each person in it. And you can share notes afterwards. Wow, I really felt the presence of Thoth there, or something like that. And other people said, yeah, I had a sense of great meaning coming down here. But it's really what was so important is for them. Now, if you do magic as a sort of demonstration for other people, you could do it in 2 ways. If you do it as a demonstration to impress other people, to give them awe and wonderment at what you're doing, I say, well, really, you're doing it in the religious spirit. You're founding a religion if you do that. If you do it from the point of view of, let's see if it works. I'm going to take the Goetia and I'm going to follow what it says, and I'm going to take notes and, perhaps get people to look and to check what happens, and then nothing happens. You're really doing science, or should I say pseudoscience, because you're trying to see if you get a repeatable result, which other people agree and see. And you're not doing magic.
Yeah.
Now, what I'd say there, I think to people who say, does magic work? I'd say by definition it does. Your science teacher takes 2 clear liquids and pours them together and it suddenly goes red and people say, wow, that's magic. Anything that works is magic, if it's surprising particularly. So if you did that experiment before a team of observers, and nothing happened, does it mean the magic hasn't worked? No, it means the magic wasn't there. The scientific method banished it. You see, so I feel that magic needs to be sort of in a like a space, whether it's an actual space, magic circle, or sort of sealed in, and it's the individual that really finds the value of it. And any sort of demonstration for outsiders, or even if you rush off and tell people about it. I had this amazing experience when I was a little kid. Must have been about 7 or so. And I thought of a number, 7, the 3 of hearts. Counted down to the 7th card. By God, it's the 3 of hearts. And I did that about 5 times in a row. I was so excited. I rushed to my brother and said, look what I could do. 10, Queen of Diamonds. Oh, sorry, it didn't work. It never worked again because I'd moved into that trying to do a scientific demonstration rather than actually living the magic, So I feel that horrible as it is to religious people that anyone should do anything in secret and sort of all that. Despicable as it is to scientific minds that you don't have observers and have it checked properly. It's actually part of the way you invoke the magic is that sort of, and in alchemical terms, you put the stuff in a sealed vessel and heat it,
Yeah. Hermetically sealed.
Yeah, that's it.
So, Lionel, I'll maybe wrap up after this last question. I'm not sure how long we've been talking. It's gone amazingly quickly. What do you make? Do you still observe the occult scene in Britain and in America? Do you have a view of it at the moment? You know?
Yeah. Well, I feel very much out on a limb in South Africa, so far away. I see things on the internet. I really like to sort of sit down with people, you know. When I think of those times we went out to sacred places, you know, a small group of 5 or 6 friends and do things, I really miss that. And nothing on the internet gives me that same sort of intimacy and sense of being there and magic, if you like. But one of the things I have noticed is the change in academia. Academia was so anti-magic. And it goes way back, you know, magic, academia was based on the religious foundations. And it's got all the things of religion, of keeping out the heretics, you know, and what's more heretical than magic? And so it's despised by academia. But in the sort of second half, you know, 2010 onwards, or even 2000 it began, I think it was around 2000, a friend of mine who I knew in one of Gerald Suster's sort of academic essay clubs, a guy called Nicholas Goodrich Clark, he was put in charge of, in Essex University, a faculty that was exploring esoteric studies. And of course, a number of universities added that in Holland and other places. Call it esotericism. And it's recognized. Well, the first thing was, you know, people didn't really admit there was anything in magic in my childhood and that in the 70s. Then there was the idea, well, you could explore it as a pathology, you know, the silliness of human brains, you know, so, you know, you could explore it as something that went wrong every now and again. Then there came the idea, of course it's rubbish, but it's actually an important influence on Western thinking. So it deserves to be studied as a historical phenomenon. And I think that's how they got the foot in the door. You know, the study of esotericism is the study of how curious ideas have actually informed Western philosophy and art and all sorts of things. You know, and even science, you know, because Newton had all his occult interests and things like that, you see. So it sort of gave it a respectability. But now, academics actually doing something which the last thing I think of academics doing, actually speaking to the people, you know, who've done it. And I've had people, well, one was David Evans. He was one of the people who studied under Ron Hutton, studying esoteric science. And he actually created a magazine called the Journal Academic Study of Journal for the Academic Study of Magic, JASM, that was it. And I wrote an article for it. He was the one who said, you must publish your Abramelin Diary. I said, well, I don't think it's very good. And he said, no, it's a historical record, you see. So the sort of idea that this is interesting history, however much I was disappointed by it, that has sort of arisen. And I've had a couple of academics actually asking me interesting questions about it and about chaos magic and things like that. So it's certainly getting a place there. And in fact, Christopher McIntosh told me of a conference that happened in Germany, I think it was last year, where one of the things was an old friend discussed my magical model in front of these other academics as part of the contribution. So that is definitely something which has changed since my time. And I actually,
we now have scholar magicians like Stephen Skinner and Jake Stratton-Kent and all them.
Yes, yes.
Good quality stuff again. So thank you very much, Lionel. It's been fascinating talking to you. I have always come away and I think, oh, I should have asked that and that. So I'll maybe invite you on again sometime. Thank you very much.
That would be a pleasure. Thanks. Say, I'm out on a limb. It's lovely to have someone to talk to on the level about these things.
Well, the whole world's kind of locked down at the moment, aren't we? So it's good to talk. Well, thank you very much for your time, Lionel. Fascinating as ever. Thank you for watching, guys. See you soon. Bye-bye.